So we're in a sermon series on the book of Proverbs that I'm calling God's Wisdom, More Valuable Than Gold. And so far in the series, we've only had 2 sermons. And the first was about how valuable God's wisdom is. And the second was about the fear of the Lord, that it is the beginning of wisdom. And since today is the Sunday of the Youth Rally, I had in the back of my mind, I really want to do a lesson that would be especially appropriate for young people, since they'll be here for the rally. And can you guess what the very next section in Proverbs is, right after the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom? The very next subject is friendship, the influence of our peers. And I thought, that's a perfect lesson for young people. But guess what? It's not just for young people, is it? It's for all us people. All ages, all stages of life. Now, you know I like to start with something light before we get into something heavier of God's truth. So let's start with something light. The Youth Rally is about God's math, and I did find a good joke about math. How about that? So what do you call a group of friends who love math? What do you call a group of friends who love math? Nerds, yeah. Mark had his nerd shirt on yesterday. I saw that. No, you call them algebros. I like that one. Algebros. Now, what do you do if you're walking in the woods with your friend and your friend gets bitten by a rattlesnake? You find a new friend. How do you define what a friend is? These aren't funny necessarily. I think these are good, though. A friend is someone who knows all about you and still loves you anyway. A friend is someone who steps in when the rest of the world steps out. And a friend is someone who never gets in the way unless you're headed in the wrong direction. One of the resources I'm using for the whole series on God's wisdom is a book by my friend Tommy South, and his chapter, Don't Be Dumb About Your Friends, is one I'm relying on a lot for today's lesson. So there's that old saying that says you can judge a man by the company he keeps. Maybe you've heard that saying before, and it does certainly ring true. There's a lot of truth to that. You can know what a person is like sometimes by just knowing the kind of people that they hang with. Now, that's not an absolute truth, because the Bible tells us that Jesus was a friend of who? Tax collectors and sinners. But Jesus wasn't anything like tax collectors and sinners. He hung around with those shady people that many people of moral, the high road certainly didn't hang around with, because he knew he could influence them, and he knew they really couldn't influence him. He wanted them to know that God loved everyone, and that God wanted everyone to be saved. And he also knew that sometimes people on the lower ladders of ethical and living are sometimes even more open to the gospel than those who see themselves as high on the ethical ladder. But that doesn't negate the general truthfulness of that old saying. Usually you can judge a person's character by the people that they spend time with. You can know their wisdom or their foolishness by the wisdom and foolishness of their friends. Now, that saying isn't found in Proverbs, but I think Solomon would likely have agreed with that saying. Solomon had a lot to say about friendship. And one of the main things he emphasized was that few things affect us in life as much as our friends. And therefore, it pays to be wise about our friends. Let's talk for a minute, though, about friendship. I think today's world is confused about a lot of things. And certainly friendship is one of those things our world is confused about. For many, the word friend is just a polite description of people they hardly know. So you see, I've got the images of Facebook up here, right? For many people today in the Facebook world, a friend has become basically a meaningless term, right? It's basically a list of people you hardly know at all, right? How many friends are your friends on Facebook that really aren't people you've even met in person. And yet they're your friends on Facebook. And when you unfriend them on Facebook, it just means you're removing them from your list of friends. And because so many people have adopted this form of friendship, Facebook has put a limit on the number of friends a person can have. 5,000 is the limit. Because who needs more than 5,000 friends, right? And so without a doubt, the concept of friendship needs clarification in our modern world. But, I think the ancient world needed clarification too, right? And that's why Solomon wrote there in Proverbs 17:17, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. So according to this proverb, the essence of friendship is the constancy of that friend's love. It's being there for your friend in the good times and in the bad times. Notice the emphasis in verse 17 on at all times. A friend loves at all times. Friendship isn't circumstantial. Friendship is constant. Real friends, right? And so naturally, there can be a difference in the levels of relationship in our friendships. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? And some of that's based on our common interests. You may have some friends that like some of the things you like to do, whether it be bike riding or playing games online, or maybe the sports team that you follow. Other friends have common experiences. You went to the same high school, or went to the same college. Some of our friends are just people we like. We find to be fun or funny. But not all these friendships are going to have that same level of intimacy. And out of all of our friendships, really only a few are going to be the Proverbs 17:17 friends. And that's one of those things that people learn in life as they grow in their wisdom, is they learn who the real friends are. The friends who stick with you in the times of difficulty. And not all friends are going to be that way. And that's okay, because we can only have so many BFFs, right? But you better have some. You better have a few Proverbs 17:17 friends. Now, Proverbs warns us that not everyone who self-identifies as a friend is indeed our friend. So Proverbs 18:24 says, a man of many companions may come to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. And so the companion in this verse is the friend, the friends who aren't really close friends. You can have a lot of companions that may not be there for you, but there will be those real friends that are. And one true friend is worth a whole lot more than a multitude of companions. Now, Proverbs 27, verses 5 and 6, takes it a bit further by pointing out that true friends are faithful enough that they will speak the truth to us, right? And so the verse reads, better an open reprimand than concealed love. The wounds of a friend are trustworthy, but the kisses of an enemy are excessive. In other words, there's those friends that you may have that are more like an enemy who multiplies kisses. In other words, they'll tell you what you want to hear. They won't necessarily tell you the truth, because the truth sometimes hurts, right? So there's a big difference, though, between causing a friend pain because you're telling them the truth and trying to harm them, right? There's a big difference between causing pain and intending harm. But the wounds of a friend can be trusted. Now, verse 9 adds, oil and perfume make the heart glad, and the sweetness of a friend comes from his earnest counsel. And one way to determine who your friends really are is when you think, who do I need good advice from, right? Who do I know will tell me what I really need to hear, the truth? That person is someone who is really your friend. So Proverbs not only gives advice about the friends we choose, it also encourages us to be the kind of friend that other people need. And I like this verse from Proverbs 27:10. Do not forsake your friend and your father's friend. And do not go to your brother's house in the day of your calamity. Better is a neighbor who is near than a brother who is far away. Being the right kind of friend means that we are there for others, that we don't abandon our friends in their time of need. And that's really one of the secrets to having good friends, is being a good friend. The more we're a good friend to others, the more likely they're going to be a good friend back to us. Now let's turn our attention to the impact that our friends can have on us, and why only choosing friends that have a positive impact is so important for us. So Proverbs cautions us to choose our friends wisely, right? And Proverbs gives several examples, including the first section of Proverbs chapter 1, right after the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Here we see Solomon, the wise man and wise father, pleading with his son to avoid people who will influence him to go to places that he shouldn't go and do things that he shouldn't do. Let's read that section together, starting at verse 8. Listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and don't reject your mother's teaching, for there'll be a garland of favor on your head and pendants around your neck. My son, if sinners entice you, don't be persuaded. If they say, come with us, let's set an ambush and kill someone. Let's attack some innocent person just for fun. Let's swallow them alive like Sheol, whole, like those who go down to the pit. We'll find all kinds of valuable property and fill our houses with plunder. Throw in your lot with us, and we'll all share the loot. My son, don't travel that road with them or set a foot on their path, because their feet run towards evil, and they hurry to shed blood. It is useless to spread a net where any bird can see it, but they set an ambush to kill themselves. They attack their own lives. Such are the paths of all who make profit dishonestly. It takes the lives of those who receive it. Now, this section of Proverbs talks about some pretty drastic kinds of evil behavior, right? This harming people and killing people and robbing people. But it doesn't have to be that drastic for us to know that these are the kind of people we need to avoid. The kind of people who are not going to do the right things, right? The kind of people who will entice us in a way that will weaken us or weaken our testimony as Christians. These are people that we need to be careful about associating with. And verse 17 shows just how foolish these people actually are. When it talks about you don't spread a net in front of the birds so they can see it. You don't set a trap for an animal in a way that they can detect it. And yet those who go into these kind of activities are spreading a net for themselves. They're digging a pit that they're going to fall into. It's going to come back to bite them. And wise people know this. Foolish people run into these situations. Oh, we'll never get caught. Nobody will ever know. We'll get away with it. You might for a little while, but not in the end. And so if someone urges you to go somewhere you shouldn't go, or to do something you know is wrong, don't feel that you owe them an explanation. Just say, no, I'm not going to do that. And if they're really your friend, or really the kind of friend that you need, then they're going to accept that. And they're not going to force you. But you need to know if they're the right kind of friend or not, right? You need to know it sooner rather than later. And how they respond is important. I remember something that happened to me. I don't know if I was 14 years old maybe 15. But I was in a really cool car with 4 of my friends. I was in the back seat, 2 were in the front seats, and 3 of us were in the back. And we're driving down the road on a nice day, just having a good time. All of a sudden, the driver pulls out a marijuana cigarette, goes to light it up. I didn't know what to do. I was scared. Quickly, though, I decided I was going to say something. So I said, "You put that thing away. If you light it up, let me out right now. I'll find my own way home." This was before there were cell phones, right? I couldn't text or call for help. I'd be on my own. Thankfully, the person put it away, didn't light it up. I don't know what would have happened if they had, right? Would they have gotten inebriated? Would we have gotten in an accident? Would we have gotten pulled over and arrested? I don't know, but I didn't want to find out. I don't remember ever getting into their car again after that. Later in Proverbs 23, verses 19 through 21, the wise man expands the urging to choose the right kind of people beyond those who rob and kill into more of this kind of area that I just talked about. Listen, my son, and be wise. Keep your mind on the right course. Don't associate with those who drink too much wine or with those who gorge themselves on meat, for the drunkard and the glutton will become poor, and grogginess will clothe them in rags. People who are addicted to stuff, it's not going to turn out good for them, right? This proverb warns us not so much against participating in criminal activity, but watching our associations with those who are involved with activities that are worthless and unproductive. They're headed to poverty or worse, right? And the teacher pleads with this young protege not to go with them. But it's not unusual to hear someone say something like, I can hang out with people like that, and it's not going to affect me. I won't do what they're doing. I'll just be with them and have a good time with them. But notice verse 20 says, no. Don't even associate with them. Don't spend time with them thinking it's not going to affect you and you're not going to get sucked in. Because when we associate with them, first of all, we may begin to do the things they do. It's hard to keep resisting. You might resist once or twice, but before long you find yourself doing the very same things. But even if you do resist and you don't get involved in drunkenness and drug use and things like that, it's no fun to be the only sober person with a bunch of inebriated people, right? That's not any fun. Because when people get inebriated, they get stupid. Another category of those to avoid isn't mentioned in Proverbs, but I think Proverbs would likely, the writers of Proverbs would agree, and that is to avoid those who are intentionally trying to destroy your faith. Now, this is a passage from 1 Corinthians 15. Paul says, "Do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good morals or good character. Come to your senses and stop sinning, for some people are ignorant about God, and I say this to your shame." Notice that Paul's first part of that verse says, "Do not be deceived." Where's the deception come in? Oh, I can hang with these people and it won't affect me. Do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good morals. Now, the interesting thing is, we usually pull that passage out and apply it to lots of different things. The passage actually has to do with people who are believing the wrong things. So this is more in that context of other people trying to destroy your faith. The group of people that Paul is saying the Corinthians shouldn't be spending time with and associating with are people who don't believe in the resurrection. And because they don't believe in the resurrection, they're living any way they want, right? They have a false idea about God and about life. as you can imagine, right? And so these people are attempting to destroy the faith of the Corinthians, saying, don't worry, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. It's hard to resist that kind of stuff unless you've got great conviction. We're not likely to stand up for truths that we're not thoroughly convinced of. Whether those truths be about the resurrection or about God, or whether they're about alcohol use or other drug use or anything else. Now, does this suggest that Christians shouldn't spend any time with non-Christians? Of course not. Of course not. But that would have some serious implications on our workplaces and our schools and the process of trying to bring people to Christ. But it does say to watch out for those who seek to destroy your faith, right? Be very careful to be really closely aligned with a group of friends who is out to keep you from being a Christian, right? That's different from those who aren't sure what they believe or are open to exploring what they believe. That kind of person doesn't have our best interests in mind, or they may think they do, but their ideas are warped, right? If they think that keeping you from following God is the right thing, there's something wrong with that, right? Well, let's summarize. Let's conclude our lesson by looking at Proverbs 13 and verse 20, our scripture reading for today. The one who walks with the wise will become wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. So this verse takes us back to our main premise, that the people we hang with impacts us. And it can be a positive impact or it can be a negative impact. We tend to become like the people with whom we associate the most. And being in the company of wise people has a way of rubbing off on us, and we become more wise. Whereas the company of fools tends to make us more foolish. And being a fool will pay a high price. That's why Proverbs 14:7 advises us, stay away from a foolish person. You will gain no knowledge from his speech. Likely nothing helpful is going to come from the mouth of a fool. But from a wise person, we might receive some help. Now, there's an excellent Old Testament illustration of this, found in 1 Kings chapter 12. After old wise King Solomon, who wrote the Proverbs, or most of them, after he died, his son Rehoboam became the king. And soon after Rehoboam's coronation, he was approached by a group of people who made a plea and a promise. They were led by a guy named Rehoboam. Sounds just like, or Jeroboam rather, sounds just like Rehoboam, right? The way I remember it is the R is next to the S in the alphabet. So Solomon and Rehoboam are father and son, whereas Jeroboam's the other guy left out. Anyhow, this group of people comes to him and says, lighten the load. Lighten the load on us and we will serve you. Your father put a heavy load on us. And if you know anything about Solomon, he had all these huge building projects, right? So he had all these people working really hard. They were all given their money and the load was heavy. They wanted some relief. If you'll lighten the load, we'll serve you. We'll give you our loyalty. Rehoboam said, give me a few days. I'll check with my advisors. So he went off and he first listened to the old wise men who had served his father. And they said to him, lighten the load. Lighten the load and these people will gladly give you their loyalty. Then he went to his friends, young guys like himself. What do you guys think? And they said, oh, no. You put your thumb on these people. You tell them, you thought my father was bad. You ain't seen nothing yet. You put them in their place. You exert your authority. Guess what Rehoboam did? He listened to his friends, his young friends, who were not real wise. And immediately Jeroboam took most of the country in rebellion and started a whole new country, right? The northern kingdom was created, and the southern kingdom stayed with Rehoboam, just a couple of the tribes. Now, we know this was all God's doing as part of what God had prophesied would happen, and yet it's still a very good example for us of listening to the wrong people rather than listening to the wise people. So whether you're a king or whether you're a kid, your friends are going to have a powerful influence on you. So choose your friends wisely. Let's end with this illustration. How many of you like the Indiana Jones movies? Anybody? All right. Indiana Jones, when it came out, what was that, 1980 or something like that? I was a college student. It was one of the first movies I went to like 7 times in 7 nights in a row. I loved that movie. I didn't like the second one very well, but I liked the third, and then the most recent one's pretty good too. But in that third movie, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Dr. Jones finally gets into that inner room that he's been searching for, the Holy Grail, that cup that Jesus had used at the Last Supper. And he gets there, and there's this ancient knight guarding the cups, and they're all laid out there, and there's all kinds of ornate ones, and gold and everything else, and the knight says you better choose wisely, right? Well, before Dr. Jones makes his choice, in comes the Nazi supporter guy, right? And he rushes right in there, and he looks over them, and he grabs the most ornate and beautiful one of all, and he dips it in that fountain of youth, and he takes the drink, and rather than having eternal life, he immediately ages quickly and disintegrates into a pile of dust. And with a deadpan expression, the old knight says, "He chose poorly." He chose poorly. And of course you have to laugh at that because it's such an understatement. As we're choosing our friends, it's really important that we don't choose poorly. How many people have you known who have hung with the wrong people and ended up at the wrong place at the wrong time doing wrong things? And it really can change everything in a bad, bad way, right? So choose your friends wisely. That's what Proverbs says. He who walks with the wise becomes wise. And I want to encourage all of us to take a look at our closest friends and ask the question, are these wise, godly people who are going to help me get to heaven? And if not, then we need to limit their influence on us as we seek maybe to have an influence on them in the right direction. But I'd encourage us to build strong friendships with the wise and godly people. And of course, the most important friend we need is Jesus himself, the greatest friend and the most wise and godly one of all. Jesus will always be there for us. Jesus will always lead us in the right way. And if you only have one friend in the world, make sure it's Jesus, right? Make sure it's Jesus.